Welcome to The Ambitious Introvert, the leading growth and development podcast for the estimated 56% of us who recharge by going inwards. Our purpose is to help you manage your social battery and own your energy so you can reach your true potential in your business, your career, or your life. I'm your host, Emma-Louise Parks, a former air traffic controller, entrepreneur, and a success coach with over 15 years experience. I've supported hundreds of introverts like you who dream big and are ready to take action towards making those dreams a reality without compromising their energy in the process. Each week, my guests and I will be sharing tips, tricks, and hacks on how to build your resilience, master your mindset, and cultivate self-leadership. Skills that will help you reach your goals without trying to be someone that you're not. We'll also be sharing valuable lessons and insights from our own personal experiences, all focused on one thing, helping you own your energy to reach your potential. Hello and welcome to the Ambitious Introvert podcast. I'm Emma-Louise, and today I am chatting to the lovely Alice Draper. Alice is a podcast guest placement expert and founder of Hustlin' Writers, which aims to make podcast publicity accessible to underrepresented female entrepreneurs. Now, if you're thinking, this episode is not for me because I'm not someone that ever wants to appear on a podcast, just hold fire, because that's actually not what we're talking about. Alice contacted me with an idea for an episode all about something that every single one of us faces in numerous ways in our life, and that is rejection. She talks about how she was able to reframe rejection and almost gamify it to make it something that didn't feel so scary and didn't hold her back. Now, in the episode, we talk about this in many different guises. So yes, it could be pitching for a podcast, but it also could be putting yourself forwards for a promotion. It also could be, trying to attract someone to go on a date with and plucking up the courage to ask them. There's a fear of rejection in so many situations that we face on a day-to-day basis. So I know that this conversation with Alice is going to be super useful to anyone that has that fear, which in reality is most of us in some aspect of our life. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I would invite you to listen to this with the lens of asking yourself, where am I fearing rejection in life? Because it's going to be so different for everyone. Just get curious and really dig in and see what resonates and see where there are some areas that maybe you can take on some of the things that Alice and I discuss to be able to help you move forwards and reach your potential. Alice, hello. Welcome to the Ambitious Introvert podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'm so happy to be here.
And we were just chatting before we hit record. You are in lovely Dubai, just going into your winter, which, quote unquote, in inverted commas, because winter is a beautiful time of year in Dubai where you can actually get out of the aircon and enjoy. And I'm sat here in the October rain and cold and wind. So thank you for bringing a little bit of nice weather into my day.
I hope you can feel some of it. We should just swap. It should be UK for summer because Dubai is horrible, and then go over to Dubai for winter.
I've sat with this many, many times about what's the perfect, where are the perfect places to live at different times of year? And I'm like, could I spend the summer in the UK and then the UK winter in New Zealand, which is their summer? And could I just have perpetual summer? Or, it's a long way to go, But anyway, as a sensitive soul, I really miss the sun when it's not out. I've actually got a Lumi, the sad lamps. I've got that.
Yeah.
It's really good actually at lighting for the podcast too. So, win-win. But so thank you for bringing some, heated vibes. And thank you for reaching out to be on the podcast, because this is a fascinating topic that is relevant, as we were saying before we hit record, in so many areas of life. And that is rejection and how we deal with it. So I would love you to give us a little background of how you kind of got to where you are in your business now, and how you got to this point of recognizing that you kind of needed to deal with rejection to work your way through it.
Yeah, rejection kind of a topic I stumbled into because it all started, I think, when I realized that it was a topic that kept coming up with clients. It kept coming up with people in my network, people in my communities. It came up with everyone, kind of, especially in the entrepreneurial space, is that putting yourself out there is hard. And putting yourself out there is hard because there's a good chance you'll get rejected. So yeah, my kind of journey towards working in the rejection space is because I spent a lot of time working through my fear of rejection. And I think that's because I love writing, and the career of writing is not one that you can really do if you don't get comfortable with rejections. So I grew up like really, really introverted, more introverted than I am now. I'm still an introvert, but as a child, I was the one who kind of didn't speak up, didn't know how to start conversations. I actually remember like discovering what astrology signs were and reading that I was a Leo. And there would be like descriptions like forever yearning to be the center of attention. And I was like, what's that? This is not me. I'm like a demure mouse. I'm not a lion. But yeah, like that confidence that kind of a Leo represented and that other people around me seemed to represent was so elusive. And I started studying confident people because I wanted it. And the thing that I learned from studying confident people is that they're okay with rejections. So like you could see in like primary school, a popular guy make a move on a girl, he gets shut down and he seemed to just like not bat an eyelid. Or like the popular girl would like ask the teacher for an extension. Teacher says no, and she'd smile and look as cool as a cucumber. Whereas for me, that would like, I'd be destroyed. I'd feel horrified and I wouldn't want to show my face again if someone rejected me. So faking it until I made it didn't work. But I kind of discovered something that did work, which was looking at the opportunity cost. And that was really in my kind of early career when I wanted to write for magazines and I wanted to make a living as a writer. And I started pitching myself. And initially those rejections were really difficult and I didn't want to put myself out there again. And I found a community on Facebook of writers who, it was actually like a Facebook group of writers who like named the group about rejections and they would set rejection goals. And that kind of was a huge shift to my mindset where it was like, oh, okay, rejections are more like growth milestones. This is something to normalize. This is something to celebrate. And people did celebrate it. And so I created, I think it was like probably like 6 years ago or so, I created my first rejection spreadsheet and I set a goal of getting 100 rejections that year. And that's how I got my first bylines in big magazines like Vice, HuffPost. It's how I landed my first clients. And as a writer, it's later how I shifted towards publicity. I really kind of built that rejection muscle. And yeah, it really helped me, I think, finding a community, reframing rejections into growth milestones helped me normalize them and build that rejection resilience.
I think that reframe is the biggest thing, like you say, because we have the power to decide, is something good, is something bad, is something neutral. It's a fact of life that rejection happens to everyone at various points for various reasons, but it's so easy for us to take it personally and think it means something about us or make it mean something about us. And I know for me, when I started this podcast, I wanted to reach out to people, invite them to be guests. And I was like, oh, they'll say no, they'll never, the podcast isn't big enough yet. And, they won't be interested in talking to me and they're too busy and all of these things. And underneath it all was like, oh, well, they might reject me. And there was a couple of big reframes there. And one of which was, they were not rejecting me as a person. I was offering them a business opportunity. And, it either aligns with where they are and what's a priority to them right now, or it doesn't. And actually, I see that now as, I've gotten busier as my business has grown. I say no to things and it's not a rejection of the person, but I just have to look at, especially as an introvert, my capacity. I have to look at what are my goals for the quarter? Is this something that makes sense? And, with my current business model. And sometimes that's saying no to something that, might be a really great person inviting me to, I don't know, be in a summit or on a podcast, but it's not a personal rejection. It's simply a business decision. And I have to flip it the other way when I'm reaching out to people and remember that it doesn't mean anything about me.
Yeah. And when you don't reach out to those people, Emma, you're doing something worse, which is you're self-rejecting. Isn't even the chance for that kind of potential collaboration to happen. And also, I think that kind of realizing it's not personal is so powerful, and it takes time. It takes practice. It's not overnight. But I found that developing my rejection resilience through the process of pitching myself as a journalist opened me up to lots of opportunities, because I started seeing like opportunities in rejections. So someone would respond with a very like specific, detailed response where it's a no, but you can tell that your pitch, whether it's a pitch for a collaboration, a partnership or something, sparked a lot of interest for them. And now that they've responded, and I think there's a psychological like phenomenon that describes this, they associate you more positively, or like they're more likely to respond to you the next time. And I've started a lot of relationships in ways that started initially with the rejection. So like one of my early freelance writing jobs, she rejected me, and I just sort of popped in another email like a few weeks later. She rejected me again and then responded to me a week later and said, can you work with me on this thing? And I've had a lot of that stuff happen where, yeah, you're putting yourself on people's radar. And as long as your request is respectful, well-written, well thought out, no one's looking at that and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're making an ask. Usually it's the opposite. As long as it's a good pitch and it doesn't look like it's written by a bot and not a human didn't actually write this.
And, I'll give an example that is relevant to business in this case. And with this perfect example, you pitched me to be on this podcast a long time ago, and we'd paused recording. And so I said, I'll get back to you. And then I'd made some changes to the podcast. I had to go through and, everyone that had reached out, make sure they were a good fit. And, it took me a while. It was a good few months, I think, to get back to you properly. And then I explained and I said, hey, I've got some slots opening up. Do you still want to be a guest? And you were like, yeah, I'm still interested. And then I nudged you a couple of times to book, because again, I'd emailed you and you were busy, and then you were like, oh, sorry, this has dropped off my radar. And then you got in and booked, and here we are today. But on both, there was no rejection from either of us. It's just everyone's, on their own timeline and opportunities, things are happening. But some people could see that, like maybe they see someone doesn't respond as a rejection. Maybe, I could have emailed you and said, here's the scheduler, and you don't book in. I could have thought, oh, she's rejected me. But when we look at this as a much more like a dance between two people and, their lives and their business and their energy, like you say with that editor that said no to you, and then a week later is like, actually, can you work with me? Yeah. It's such a fluid way of doing it. And I think when you can adopt that mindset, like you say, of it's not personal. It does take practice. It absolutely does, but it's not personal. Then we're in this situation now, and it's like, great. Now we get to collaborate at the right time.
Yeah. And like the kind of process of depersonalizing it, I think I notice I personalize things a lot in every sphere of life. Like in my relationship, my partner can communicate something to me and I'm immediately like, oh, it's because I did this thing and he thinks this and blah, blah, blah. When in reality, like the thing he's communicating is literally the thing he's communicating. And I think we do the same with like outreach. We kind of read into, Emma hasn't responded to my pitch because she thought it was terrible and it offended her so much. And I think in those moments, it's helpful to kind of try reframe and try imagine you're on the receiving end and someone sends a pitch to you. How would you respond? Like, unless they said something really offensive and told you like your podcast is terrible or they don't like the color of your shoes, you're probably not going to respond negatively. Maybe if it's a really uninteresting pitch, you won't remember it. And that's what I tell people about like starting to pitch is, even if you pitch badly, people don't remember bad pitches. Like unless it's offensive, we're not going to remember a pitch that didn't kind of stick out in our brain. And if it's a good one, it's like, oh, okay. And then if they didn't respond, maybe it's not an alignment right now. Maybe they've done something similar. Maybe they're booked, or maybe they thought it looks interesting and I don't have time to respond and I will get back to this later, which is often the case.
I mean, I will say on my to-do list was get back to all the people that have pitched the podcast in the last 6 months and like see who's a good fit and get it organized. And that was on my to-do list for quite a while. And again, that's not a rejection or nothing to do with any of the amazing people that pitched. And some of them had great pitches and topics, but they're not right for my show and my audience. Again, to say no to those people, it's not rejecting them. It's just saying this isn't a good fit right now. And I think like we've been given this example in like PR and podcast pitches, which is a great example, but it can work everywhere. How many people listening are holding themselves back from maybe asking for a pay rise or a promotion or putting themselves out there for a job, say, because they think, what if I don't get it? Which brings like a whole other, what if I don't get it? What if they reject me? Everyone will know. And it means that I'm bad at my current job, or it means that I'll never get promoted. For me, that overcoming that rejection and getting this like rejection resilience, I'm going to say, meant cutting the stories off. Like I really had to cut the stories. Like if I don't get it, it means that I'm not getting it now, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. And that's a little bit, as you touched on with, if your partner says something and then you're like, oh, well, I said this and he means this. It can be so easy for us to like fall into the story rabbit hole of meaning, like whatever the situation is. And I think as introverts, that's something we do even more because we internalize it, right?
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is when you're making that ask, let's say you're asking for a raise, I always suggest to brace for discomforts, because I think that what creates so much friction with doing these things is we expect it to not be uncomfortable. We expect ourselves to already be confident enough to say to, whether it's your employer or you're pitching in your partnership or your business, you think if you're not, at least I do this, if I'm not ready to confidently make this ask, am I ready to make this ask at all? And I think one of the most liberating things that I've learned from various people that I follow and admire is that confidence usually doesn't come first. It's the action that comes first. That we make that ask feeling really uncomfortable. And then also that kind of growth mindset. So, if you know that you are asking for a promotion, like there's also making room for that to not go as planned, and that may not lead to the desired results. And I think that if we're not prepared for that, we can kind of spiral and think like, oh my gosh, I should never have made that ask and stuff. But rather, like hearing no is inevitable, and it's a good sign. It's a sign that we're pushing our comfort zones. And there are things we might learn. We might learn from our boss the specific thing that he wants to see or she wants to see before she can give a promotion, or she doesn't have budget, but there are other ways you could go about getting that promotion, maybe working in a different role or something. But it's better to have that knowledge than to kind of stay in a limbo space, just waiting for someone else to decide you're ready for that promotion.
And that's the big thing. I think we can sit in our comfort zone, but not growing and not getting what we want because we make these assumptions of, well, I'm not going to get that, or they're going to say no, or this person might think I'm stupid. And we make these assumptions. And certainly in my experience, when I have pushed myself and done the things, the high majority of the time, people are like, oh yeah, great. Thanks for like volunteering, or thanks for offering, or thanks for putting yourself forward. And I'm like, oh, so I've made this thing about it will be a no, and it's not. And it's like you say, this balance of being open to all of the opportunities and all of the outcomes, and knowing that it's okay either way. This idea of being perfectly ready for things, I mean, this shows up so much in high performers. It shows up a lot in entrepreneurs of the thing has to be ready before I can share it. That it has to be perfect, and I have to feel like 1,000% confident about it before I can talk about it. No, it's this, and this is proven. This is psychological based coaching where, everyone thinks that they have to have their mindset perfect before they make the behavior change. And it's actually the behavior change that positively impacts the mindset. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah. Growth happens through discomfort. And I think like neuroscience shows that as well. So have you ever made an ask where it hasn't gone as planned?
Oh, yeah, many times. So one that comes to mind, actually, a former coach of mine set me a challenge. We gamified me pitching to podcasts. So she said, yeah, it's a very similar thing to what you were talking about. So she set me the challenge to get 50 no's because she said I wasn't aiming high enough because I was like pitching to these podcasts and getting yes. And she's like, yeah, but this is like a really new podcast, or, you know, this person's got a really small audience. She's like, I want you to get outside of your comfort zone. So let's aim for 50 no's. I was like, yeah, okay, great. So I made this list of like, I think it listed like 100 podcasts because I was like, there you go, 50-50 chance. That's great. So the first two that I pitched to, the first one, I was like, there is no way this person is going to have me on their podcast. Her name's May-Kay Sang. I don't know if you're familiar with May-Kay. She's been on here and she is also a podcast pitch expert. So I thought, oh, I'm new to this. If I pitch a podcast pitch expert, there's no way it's going to be good enough. So I laid out this pitch and fully expecting a no. And she responded and she's like, oh, this is great. I'd love to have a chat and then get you on the podcast. So that was the first one. That was quite funny. And on the same day, I also pitched to the Boss Babe podcast, which I don't even know even exists anymore. And they've obviously like millions of followers. So I was like, well, they're probably going to say no, but you never know. And they came back and they said no. So that was like, okay. And that was a good, I think they both happened on the same day. So the duality there of the one I was really expecting a no from, I got a yes. And the one I was like, oh, this is probably going to be a no because they're huge. I got a no. And both of those were okay.
I love that so much. And I love the way your coach approached it, which is aiming for the 50 no's, because similar to my kind of story with setting a rejection goal is you're no longer sitting at your email thinking, when are they going to reply? And they haven't replied. I'm going to look so silly because you've shifted the goalpost. The goalpost is I'm focused on getting those rejections. I know that's the sign that I'm putting myself out there. And I feel like when you get that acceptance, it's like, oh my gosh, did not see this happening. Because I think we also like create self-imposed limits. And I see it a lot, especially amongst women and especially amongst like sensitive, introverted women, is that we will be like, that's too big. That's not within my range. That's a long shot. I get it from clients when I show them where I'm pitching them. They're like, I'm not ready for something like that. And then when there's a yes, it's like, what? Like, how did that happen? And I think shifting it to how your coach said, which is aiming for the no's, allows us to shoot a lot higher than we would if we were thinking, I want to shoot for places, I want to pitch places where I'm sure I'll get accepted.
Oh, and it was so fun because I get a no and I was like, yes, I've got a no. So I could go tick it. And I was like getting closer. I was like, this is really warped. But it worked, right? And it made me do it. And it made me reach out. And I did get a lot of yeses. And I got to go on some great podcasts and connect with some great people. And, you know, that really was for me a lesson in like not being attached to the outcome or not making it mean something about me. I would love to touch on something you just said there about, you know, if we don't feel like we've got everything that is needed. A client of mine has recently, she's been hiring for her business, and I checked over what she was putting out there for the role. And she had put such a great thing on there. She put, if you are someone who identifies as female and you're reading this and you have even 40% of what I'm asking for, I encourage you to apply, because it's very likely that you are kind of self-imposing perfectionism on yourself and feeling like if you haven't got all of the things. And the data has shown that males are much more likely to apply for a role where they are actually probably not that well suited or don't have the experience, but they'll give it a go. Whereas women will be like, oh, well, I only have 99% of things here, so I'm not gonna do it. But she actually called that out in the job description, which I loved, because I feel like that invites, like, don't worry about being rejected, just come and share. Because to this client, the energy of the person and their values and their willingness to learn and fit into the team are all just as important as, you know, ticking the experience boxes.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I would say, like, when it comes to hiring, I mean, if I was hiring, I would much rather have someone who doesn't tick all the boxes, but is really teachable. and has the ability to kind of grow and fit in, and then have someone who has ticked all the boxes and is kind of more rigid in their thinking and approach. One of my clients who's a business coach, she does a similar thing with her business programs in the marketing, which is that she said, like, women kind of look at it and think, I'm not ready for a program like this. I haven't achieved XYZ and done this thing, and this is for someone. So she's also like called that out in the sales, and it's like, if you meet like a certain percentage, don't overthink it. Like, book a call and we'll see if you're ready for this. Yeah, so I love that kind of calling that out.
It's just such an interesting topic, and I think it highlights obviously the disparity between how women and men consider themselves to be qualified for certain things, but also how much we do limit ourselves. I know from being, I have some great communities in the entrepreneurial space, people that I've connected with over the last few years, and some good friends that I've made, how they, at various stages of my journey, they have seen me very differently to how I would see myself. And I'm a fairly confident person, but there are still things that, when you're inside the jar, you can't read the label, and we know ourselves in a very certain identity with a certain skill set and a certain capacity. And there have been things I'm like, oh yeah, like that, almost like that's not for me. And these people are like, what? Like, you could totally do that. You're amazing at whatever it is. Or, oh, I've seen people do that and they're nowhere near as good as you. And I'm like, So I think that where we tend to internalize as introverts, the thing I'd like to add there is, talk to people that know you, that know your skill set, that have experienced you, because the chances are they will see you in a very different light, and they will see your possibility and how much potential you have. And they'll probably be like, there's no way you're going to get rejected for this because, you're more than qualified. Whereas as individuals, we tend to go, oh yeah, I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I think that's such a helpful hack when it comes to writing a professional bio, is when we're, like you said, you can't read the labels from inside the jar. So when we're trying to do it ourselves, it's really hard to think or put the words of all the amazing things we've done. So a helpful hack is talk to a friend or someone who knows your business or your work quite intimately and respects you, and get them to describe you to you, because they will probably come up with words that you wouldn't have even thought about and mention things in a way that you wouldn't have thought to mention yourself.
Okay, I love this. I feel like everyone should do this if you're listening, whether you are an employee, obviously you'll have like team members and colleagues that work with you, whether it's just even to do with like your parenting or, how you are as a friend, and obviously as entrepreneurs, how are you as a business owner, because people will see things in a way that you don't, and that might just give people the confidence to go out and, aim for that next thing and not worry so much about the rejection.
Yeah. And it's a big part of kind of like my work and publicity is you kind of come in from the outside and pick up on stories that a client doesn't pick up on. And I feel like when I'm trying to image myself, I'm like, I need someone else to come in and do the process I do to people, because it's so much harder to do it for myself than it is to do it for a client. So yeah, there's definitely so much value in getting someone to help you develop the words, whether it's a professional bio or stories or topics or anything. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Alice, for coming and sharing your experience and your wisdom, and also these really great tips. I feel like people have got so much that they can take away from this. Before we wrap up, I would love to ask you, obviously we know you're an ambitious, sensitive introvert because we've talked about that. So what is one of the ways that you ensure that you own your energy so that you can reach your potential?
I love this question. I don't know if there's just one way. I mean, I try to think of maybe just one way, and I think it comes down to a combination of things. I go for daily walks, and I find that just that kind of quiet space of not being involved is helpful. But I think also like the whole reason why I'm an entrepreneur is related to being an introvert. It's related to being sensitive. So I don't take meetings whenever I kind of dictate my own calendar. I can shift things around as needed if I decide that like I want some days where I'm not talking to anyone. I can do that. So yeah, I think probably daily walks and also having created a life for myself which has maximum flexibility.
I love that. And those call-free days are so, so vital as introverts. I feel it. Alice, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to chat to you on the Ambitious Introvert podcast.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was great being here.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Ambitious Introvert. I really hope that you enjoyed my chat with Alice as much as I enjoyed having it. So just to touch on a couple of things that we discussed in that episode and to give you some tangible things that you can take away from it. Alice's answer to owning her energy was a lot around calendar management, which is something as an entrepreneur, obviously, we have the beauty of doing. Now, if you are someone listening to this who is in employment and you don't have the ability to fully manage your own workload and calendar, have a look and just think, how could you employ this tactic to manage your energy a little bit better? Alice talked about having calls on certain days and days without calls so she can recharge, which is something I also do and a lot of my entrepreneur clients do. But how is this available to you even if you're employed? Is there a possibility that you can manage it to put certain tasks on certain days? Can you talk to your line manager and see potentially about making sure that you have a block of time without interruptions so that you can do your best work and really own your energy? The other thing I wanted to touch on was everything that we talked about in rejection and the different ways of reframing it. A question that I ask clients quite often when there is a fear of rejection there is, what's the worst that can happen? So that is something that you can take away. And if you do find yourself in that situation where you have concerns or you're thinking, oh, but what if they say no? What is the actual worst that can happen? And keep going with that. What's the worst that can happen? Someone says no. And then what's the worst that can happen? Well, you feel bad. And then what's the worst that can happen? And eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, it's really not that bad. And then what's the best that can happen? Obviously, if we are taking a bit of a risk and putting ourselves out there and putting our hand up for something, the potential payoff, as Alice said, is so much bigger. So I would invite you to just keep that in mind. Like, what is the actual worst that can happen if you go ahead and make some big moves? Thank you again for tuning in, and I will catch you next week. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope that you're feeling expanded to what's possible for you, motivated to take action, and inspired about how you can start to own your energy. I share even more tools and resources on my Introverts Only email newsletter. By signing up, you not only get early access to the Ambitious Introvert products and services, but you also get brand new podcast episodes delivered straight to your inbox every Monday, meaning you'll never miss your weekly dose of introvert-friendly inspiration. Sign up now at theambitiousintrovert.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. See you next week.